The Song of Hope begins. Nicholas Johnson, a 14-year-old boy living in a small, forgotten town in the outskirts of Chicago, had always known hardship. Life had never been easy, but he never let the weight of his struggles crush his spirit. The only constant in his life was his grandmother, Eleanor Johnson, who raised him after his parents disappeared. Eleanor wasn't just his guardian. She was his world. She was the one who held his hand when he was scared, sang lullabies to him when he was young, and made sure he had a warm meal, even when there wasn't enough for herself. Eleanor, despite her aging body and frailty, worked endlessly to keep them afloat. But recently, her health had taken a severe turn. A condition that had gone unnoticed for too long had now become a life-threatening ailment. The doctors informed Nicholas that Eleanor needed immediate surgery, one that would cost more money than the boy could even dream of. Without it, she wouldn't survive much longer. The thought of losing her, the only family he had ever known, was unbearable. He didn't know his parents, had no idea if they were alive or dead, and Eleanor never spoke much about them. To him, Eleanor was his mother, father, and everything in between. He would have done anything to save her, but as a young orphan with no financial means, his options were limited. Nicholas found himself at the local orphanage after Eleanor's health began to deteriorate. He was placed there by social services as Eleanor could no longer care for him, though it broke his heart to leave her side. The orphanage was a cold and lonely place, and Nicholas often found himself staring out of the window, lost in thought. His only solace came from the memories of singing with his grandmother, those peaceful moments when everything else in the world faded away, and it was just the two of them, lost in the music. One night, while lying in the dimly lit dormitory of the orphanage, an idea struck him. He would sing, just as he had done with Eleanor all those years, and he would find a way to raise money for her surgery. He had heard stories of young talents being discovered in the city, and though the odds seemed impossible, Nicholas knew that he had no other choice. His voice, a gift he had inherited from his grandmother, was the only thing that had ever brought him comfort. Whenever he sang, he felt like he was flying, as if the weight of the world was lifted off his shoulders. And if it could bring him peace, maybe it could bring him something more, perhaps even a miracle. Determined to do something, Nicholas started sneaking out of the orphanage at night. He would walk the dark streets of the city, hoping to find a place where he could sing, where someone might hear him and offer help. It was a dangerous endeavor for a boy his age, but Nicholas's desperation overpowered his fear. He found himself at a rundown bar one evening, where a small crowd had gathered for live music. The performers were mostly struggling artists trying to make a name for themselves, and Nicholas figured he had nothing to lose by asking for a chance. With shaky hands, he approached the bar owner, a burly man with a gruff voice and a skeptical expression. "What do you want, kid?" the man grumbled as he wiped down the bar. "I want to sing," Nicholas replied, his voice steadier than he expected. "I need to raise money for my grandmother's surgery." The bar owner chuckled, shaking his head. "You think you can just walk in here and sing? This isn't some charity, kid." Nicholas didn't back down. "Please, just let me try. If I'm no good, I'll leave." Something in the boy's eyes must have struck a chord with the man because, after a long pause, he sighed and gestured toward the small stage in the corner. "Fine. You get one shot." Nicholas took a deep breath, stepping onto the stage. His heart pounded in his chest as he faced the modest crowd. Closing his eyes, he thought of Eleanor and the songs they used to sing together. He thought of the nights when she would hum melodies as she tucked him into bed, her voice soft and full of love. With that memory in his heart, he opened his mouth and began to sing. The room fell silent almost immediately. His voice, rich and soulful, filled the air, carrying a depth of emotion that belied his young age. The patrons, who had been talking and drinking moments before, now sat in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the boy on stage. Nicholas sang a song of hope, one that spoke of love, loss, and the will to keep going even when the odds seemed insurmountable. His voice echoed through the bar, weaving a spell that seemed to hold everyone captive. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Nicholas barely registered it. All he could think about was Eleanor and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could save her. The bar owner, who had watched the entire performance with his arms crossed, was clearly impressed. "You've got talent, kid," he said as Nicholas stepped down from the stage. "Come back tomorrow night. I'll pay you to sing." And just like that, Nicholas's journey had begun. He returned to the bar night after night, singing his heart out to raise the money he needed for Eleanor's surgery. Word of the talented orphan boy spread quickly, and soon the bar was filled with people coming to hear him sing. Though the money he earned was modest, it was more than he had ever had, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One fateful night, as Nicholas stood on the stage ready to perform, something unexpected happened. Among the crowd was a woman he had never seen before, Roberta Clarkson, a renowned music producer. She had come to the bar by chance, looking for a quiet place to relax after a long day. But when Nicholas started singing, she was immediately drawn to him. There was something hauntingly familiar about his voice, something that stirred emotions she hadn't felt in years. As Nicholas sang, Roberta felt a strange connection to the boy. Memories of a past she had tried to forget came flooding back, and before she knew it, tears were streaming down her face. She didn't understand why, but she knew she had to talk to him, to find out who he was. When Nicholas finished his song and stepped off the stage, he was greeted by Roberta, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and curiosity. "You have an incredible gift," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" And that was the moment everything changed for Nicholas. Little did he know, his life was about to take a turn he never expected, as Roberta held the key to a secret that had been buried for years, a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about his past. Transcript of YouTube video, Part 1. On a quiet night in a small town, a 14-year-old orphan named Nicholas Johnson stood before a crowd, his heart pounding as he prepared to sing for the one person who mattered most, his ailing grandmother. Little did he know that his song would not only touch the hearts of strangers, but would also set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever. This is the story of love, sacrifice, and the secrets we carry with us. A story that begins with a boy, a song, and a hope for a miracle. The encounter that changed everything. The next morning, Nicholas awoke in the orphanage to the dull sound of rain pattering against the window. His life, still burdened by the uncertainty of Eleanor's health, carried the weight of what felt like an impossible goal. He was making progress with the money from his performances, but it was nowhere near enough for the surgery. Despite his determination, the weight of reality often felt heavier than the hope that guided him. After slipping through the orphanage's back door that evening, he walked down the wet streets of Chicago, his shoes soaked through, but his mind focused on only one thing: singing. The streets were darker than usual, and the cold bit through his thin jacket, but Nicholas pushed forward. Tonight was another chance to make more money, to inch closer to saving Eleanor. As he arrived at the bar, he noticed the small crowd was more lively than usual. His performances had started to draw in regulars, and for a place as rundown as the bar was, his singing brought a sense of warmth and togetherness. However, Nicholas noticed a figure sitting alone at a table in the back, Roberta Clarkson, the woman from the night before. Roberta sat quietly, her posture stiff and her eyes fixed on the stage. She wasn't there for a drink, nor to enjoy the atmosphere. Her interest was entirely on Nicholas. The previous night, she had left the bar in a daze, her mind racing with thoughts of the boy whose voice carried so much emotion. She had spent the entire day researching, digging through her past memories, trying to make sense of the feelings that Nicholas's singing had stirred within her. She hadn't expected to return, but something inside her told her she needed to. She needed to speak with him, to find out more about this boy who seemed to bring back memories she had long buried. Roberta was no stranger to the music industry. She had built a career out of discovering and nurturing talent, but this was different. There was something deeper here, something personal. Nicholas stepped onto the stage as the crowd settled down, the familiar hush falling over the bar as they prepared to listen. His heart was still heavy, as it always was before he sang, but tonight there was an extra edge of nervousness. He had noticed Roberta watching him and wondered why she had come back. There was something about the way she looked at him that made him uneasy, though he couldn't explain why. Taking a deep breath, Nicholas closed his eyes and began to sing. The song he chose tonight was one of Eleanor's favorites, a tender ballad that spoke of love, loss, and hope. As his voice filled the room, the audience was captivated once again. The melody was soft yet powerful, and the lyrics echoed the deep emotions that Nicholas had been carrying in his heart since his grandmother had fallen ill. His voice was rich, mature beyond his years, and carried a raw vulnerability that touched everyone who heard him. But tonight, Nicholas wasn't singing just for the crowd. He was singing for Eleanor. He was singing for hope, for the small chance that his voice could bring in enough money to save the only person who had ever truly loved him. Roberta watched from the shadows, her emotions swirling as Nicholas's voice cut through the noise of her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about this boy. It wasn't just his voice, it was something deeper. She had to speak with him. As the last note of the song hung in the air, she stood up from her table, her heart pounding in her chest. The applause was deafening, but Nicholas barely noticed. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and all he could think about was how far he still had to go to save Eleanor. As he stepped off the stage, he felt a hand on his arm. Startled, he looked up to see Roberta standing in front of him, her eyes intense. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. Nicholas blinked, unsure of what to say. He had never been approached by anyone after his performances, especially not someone like her. There was something about her that made him nervous, but also curious. "Okay," he replied hesitantly. "But why?" Roberta hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know how to explain it, but when you sing, it reminds me of someone I used to know, someone who was very important to me." Nicholas frowned in confusion. "I don't understand. I'm just trying to raise money for my grandmother's surgery." Roberta's expression softened, and she gestured toward a nearby table. "Please, sit with me. Let me explain." Reluctantly, Nicholas followed her to the table, his heart racing. He didn't know what to expect, but something about the way Roberta spoke made him feel like this conversation was important, more important than he could comprehend at the moment. Once they were seated, Roberta took a deep breath and began to speak. "Years ago, I knew a man named Ander. He was a musician, much like you. His voice, it was like nothing I'd ever heard before. We were in love, and we planned to build a life together. But one day, he disappeared. He left without a trace, and I never saw him again." Nicholas stared at her, his mind racing. He had never heard of anyone named Ander, but the way Roberta spoke made him feel like this story had some connection to him. "I don't know why," Roberta continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But when I heard you sing last night, it reminded me of Ander. Your voice, your mannerisms. It's as if I'm hearing him again. I know this might sound crazy, but I think you might be connected to him." Nicholas felt a chill run down his spine. He had always wondered about his father, but Eleanor had never told him much. All he knew was that his father had left when he was just a baby, and that he had been a musician. Could it be possible that this Ander was his father? The thought sent his mind spiraling. I don't know what to say," Nicholas stammered. "My grandmother never really told me much about my parents. She said my father left when I was a baby, and that he was a musician, but that's all I know." Roberta's eyes widened. "A musician? And your grandmother, does she know anything more?" Nicholas shrugged, feeling a mixture of frustration and sadness. "She's sick. She hasn't told me much. And now, I don't want to burden her with more questions. I don't even know if she has the answers." Roberta leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Nicholas, I don't want to push you, but I think it's important that you find out. If your father was Andrew, you deserve to know. And maybe I can help you." Nicholas sat in silence for a long moment, his mind racing. This was all too much to process. Could it really be possible that the father he had never known was somehow connected to this woman? And if so, why had Eleanor kept it a secret all these years? "I need to think about this," Nicholas finally said, his voice shaky. "I don't know if I'm ready to ask my grandmother about it yet." Roberta nodded, her expression understanding. "Take your time. But if you ever want to talk, or if you want help finding out the truth, I'm here. I've been searching for answers for a long time, and maybe we can find them together." Nicholas nodded, his mind still spinning with questions. As he left the bar that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Roberta's words had opened a door to a past he had never known, and now he had to decide whether he was ready to walk through it. As he walked back to the orphanage, the rain still falling gently around him, Nicholas felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. He had spent his whole life wondering about his father, and now, for the first time, it seemed like he might be closer to finding out the truth. But what if the truth wasn't what he wanted to hear? What if his father had abandoned him, just like Eleanor had always said? And what if digging into the past only brought more pain? Nicholas didn't know the answers to these questions, but one thing was clear. His life was no longer just about saving Eleanor. Now, it was also about uncovering the secrets of his past, and whatever those secrets were, they were bound to change everything. Transcript of YouTube video. Part 2. Nicholas Johnson's journey to save his grandmother took an unexpected turn when a mysterious woman named Roberta appeared, claiming to know something about his past. As she shared her story of a lost love named Andrew, a musician who disappeared years ago, Nicholas's world was turned upside down. Could Andrew be the father he had never known? And if so, why had his grandmother kept this secret for so long? With questions swirling in his mind, Nicholas faced a decision that would change his life forever. The secrets we bury. The days after Roberta's revelation felt like a haze to Nicholas. His mind was spinning with possibilities, questions, and a strange mixture of fear and hope. He hadn't seen Roberta since their conversation, but her words clung to him like shadows he couldn't shake. Could his father still be alive? Could Andrew, the man Roberta loved, really be the father he had always wondered about but never known? Nicholas couldn't stop thinking about it, even as he continued his nightly performances at the bar. Singing used to be an escape, a way to focus on saving his grandmother, but now it felt different. Each time he opened his mouth to sing, his mind would drift back to Roberta's story and the haunting possibility that his life had been built on secrets he had never even suspected. One evening, as Nicholas walked through the rainy streets on his way to the bar, he felt the weight of the uncertainty growing inside him. He had made enough money to pay for part of his grandmother's surgery, but time was running out. The doctors had said that without the procedure, Eleanor wouldn't survive much longer, and the thought of losing her terrified Nicholas. He reached the bar, but tonight, something was different. The usual crowd was there, but there was an air of excitement that Nicholas couldn't quite place. As he entered the dimly lit room, Jack Rivera, the gruff but kind-hearted bar owner, waved him over. "Kid, you've got some special guests tonight," Jack said with a smirk. "Don't be nervous, but this might be your big break." Nicholas frowned, confused. Special guests. Jack nodded toward a table near the stage. There, seated with Roberta, were two people Nicholas didn't recognize, a tall man in a sharp suit and a woman with a clipboard, looking very official. "That's Charles and Kelly from Dream Sounds Records," Jack explained. "Roberta brought them in tonight to see you." Nicholas's heart skipped a beat. Dream Sounds Records was one of the biggest labels in the country, and Roberta had connections there. He suddenly felt the weight of the situation crash down on him. This wasn't just another night at the bar. This could be the opportunity that changed everything, if he didn't mess it up. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped onto the stage, the familiar nerves amplified by the fact that his performance tonight could determine his future. He glanced over at the table where Roberta and the two industry executives sat, their eyes fixed on him, and he forced himself to take a deep breath. He closed his eyes and began to sing. This time, the song came from a deeper place than ever before. It wasn't just about raising money for Eleanor's surgery anymore. It was about everything. It was about the pain of growing up without a father, the love he had for his grandmother, and the swirling confusion of possibly uncovering secrets he had never imagined. The emotions poured out of him, raw and unfiltered, and as his voice filled the room, the crowd fell silent. The room was mesmerized by Nicholas's performance. Even the bar's regulars, who had heard him sing many times before, seemed to be hearing something new in his voice. He wasn't just singing a song. He was telling a story, his story, and it resonated with everyone who listened. When he finished, the room erupted into applause, louder and more enthusiastic than ever before. But Nicholas's eyes were fixed on Roberta and the two executives. They weren't clapping. Instead, they were exchanging glances, as if communicating something without words. Nicholas couldn't tell if that was a good sign or a bad one. After the performance, as the crowd began to disperse, Roberta approached Nicholas with a smile. "That was incredible, Nicholas," she said warmly. "I knew you had something special, and I wanted to show it to the right people." The two executives stood behind her, and Charles, the man in the suit, stepped forward, extending his hand to Nicholas. "You've got a lot of talent, kid," he said, his tone businesslike but respectful. "We'd like to talk to you about a potential contract with Dream Sounds Records. It's not something we offer lightly, but Roberta speaks very highly of you." Nicholas shook his hand, his mind still racing. A contract with Dream Sounds Records. It felt surreal. He could hardly believe that this was happening. "We'll need to discuss the details, of course," Kelly, the woman with the clipboard, added. "But we think you could have a bright future in music. There's a lot of potential here, and we want to help you develop it." Nicholas could hardly speak. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he had been dreaming of. Chance to make a real difference, to earn enough money to save Eleanor, and maybe even more. But as exciting as the prospect was, a nagging feeling pulled at him. Was he really ready for this? And what about Roberta's story? He still didn't know if Andrew was his father, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. "Thank you," Nicholas finally managed to say, his voice steady, but his mind swirling with 100 questions. I need to think about it." Charles and Kelly exchanged a glance, but Roberta smiled and placed a reassuring hand on Nicholas's shoulder. "Take your time," she said. "This is a big decision, but just know that we're here for you, whatever you decide." As the executives left, Nicholas remained standing near the stage, his mind racing. The opportunity was incredible, but something about it felt overwhelming. He still hadn't spoken to Eleanor about Andrew, and the weight of that secret hung over him like a dark cloud. Later that night, Nicholas returned to the orphanage. He lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The contract with Dream Sounds could be the answer to all his problems. He could make enough money to pay for Eleanor's surgery, and maybe even more. But the thought of signing the contract without knowing the truth about his father filled him with a sense of unease. The next day, Nicholas made up his mind. He had to talk to Eleanor. He couldn't keep going without knowing the truth about his father, and if Andrew really was his father, he deserved to know. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about understanding who he was and where he came from. After school, Nicholas made his way to the hospital where Eleanor was staying. His heart raced as he walked through the sterile halls, the faint smell of antiseptic in the air. He hadn't visited Eleanor in a few days, and the guilt weighed on him. He hoped she wouldn't be too upset with him for staying away. When he reached her room, Eleanor was sitting up in bed, looking frail but alert. Her eyes lit up when she saw Nicholas, and she smiled warmly. "My boy," she said softly, her voice weak but full of love. "You've been busy, haven't you?" Nicholas nodded, taking a seat beside her bed. Yeah, I've been singing. A lot. Eleanor's smile widened. I always knew you had a voice that could move mountains. Nicholas hesitated, unsure of how to bring up the topic that had been weighing on him. He didn't want to upset her, but he knew he couldn't keep going without knowing the truth. Grandma, he began slowly, there's something I need to ask you. Eleanor's smile faded slightly, and she looked at him with concern. What is it, Nicholas? Nicholas took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. It's about my father. You've never told me much about him, but I met someone recently, a woman named Roberta. She said she knew someone named Andrew, and she thinks he might be my father. Eleanor's expression froze, her face suddenly pale. For a long moment, she said nothing, her eyes distant, as if she were lost in thought. Nicholas's heart raced. Grandma, is it true? Was my father named Andrew? Why didn't you tell me? Eleanor closed her eyes, a deep sigh escaping her lips. When she opened them again, they were filled with sadness. Oh, Nicholas, I wanted to protect you. Nicholas felt a lump form in his throat. Protect me from what? Eleanor looked away, her hands trembling slightly. Your father. Andrew was a good man, but he was troubled. He loved you, Nicholas, but he had demons. I didn't want you to grow up with the burden of knowing. Nicholas's mind spun with questions. What kind of demons? Eleanor hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. He struggled with addiction, with making the right choices. He wanted to be a part of your life, but he couldn't. And when he disappeared, I didn't know how to explain it to you. I thought it would be easier if you didn't know. Nicholas's heart ached. All these years, he had wondered about his father, and now the truth was finally coming out. But it wasn't the truth he had hoped for. His father hadn't left because he didn't care. He had left because he couldn't stay. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Nicholas whispered, his voice breaking. Eleanor reached out, placing a trembling hand on his. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want you to grow up resenting him, or thinking that you weren't enough. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe you deserved to know the truth. Nicholas swallowed hard, trying to process the burden of truth. Nicholas sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed, struggling to absorb the weight of her words. His grandmother had always been his rock, the one person who never let him down. And yet, here she was, revealing secrets that unraveled the very foundation of his life. The revelation about his father, Andrew, left him torn between anger and sorrow. He had spent years imagining what kind of man his father might have been, but this truth was far more complicated than he could have ever anticipated. Eleanor's frail hand rested gently on his. Her eyes, once so full of life, now shimmered with a mixture of regret and exhaustion. Nicholas, she said softly, her voice trembling, I never meant to keep this from you. I thought I was protecting you. But I see now that I may have caused more harm. Nicholas's heart pounded as he searched her face, seeking answers to questions that had haunted him for years. But why, Grandma? Why didn't you tell me? I always wondered why he left. If he didn't want me, or if there was something wrong with me. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes, and her voice faltered as she spoke. No, my boy, it was never about you. Andrew loved you more than you could ever know. But he had his demons, addiction, a light that pulled him away from us. I thought it was best if you didn't grow up with that weight on your shoulders. I wanted you to have a chance at a life unburdened by his mistakes. Nicholas felt his emotions rise to the surface, a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and sorrow that left him trembling. He had dreamed of finding his father one day, of knowing why he had disappeared, but this truth was more painful than he could have anticipated. He didn't know what to say or how to feel. All he knew was that the world seemed a little darker, a little colder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence, a rhythmic reminder of how fragile Eleanor's life had become. Nicholas stared at the floor, his mind spinning with unanswered questions. Could Roberta really be right? Could his father, Andra, have loved him but been unable to stay? And if that was true, what had happened to him? Was he still out there, or was he lost forever? Finally, Nicholas broke the silence, his voice thick with emotion. Did you ever hear from him after he left? Eleanor shook her head slowly, her eyes distant as if reliving the memories. No. After he left, I never saw him again. I searched for him for years, hoping he might come back, but he disappeared without a trace. I had to accept that he wasn't coming back. Nicholas swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. The absence of his father had always been a painful void in his life, but knowing that his grandmother had searched for him too, only to be met with the same silence, made the ache even worse. He realized then that she had suffered just as much as he had, if not more. She had tried to shield him from the pain, but in doing so, she had carried the burden alone. As they sat together in the quiet of the hospital room, Nicholas felt a strange sense of connection with his grandmother, a deeper understanding of the choices she had made. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or devastated by the truth, but one thing was certain. He couldn't let it consume him. There were still so many unknowns, and now, more than ever, he needed answers. "Grandma," he said softly, "there's someone else I need to talk to." "Roberta, the woman who came to see me at the bar. She said she knew Andra. She thinks he might be my father. I need to talk to her again. I need to find out if she knows what happened to him." Eleanor nodded weakly, her face pale but full of understanding. "If you think it will help, then you should. But be careful, Nicholas. The past can be a heavy thing to carry." Nicholas squeezed her hand gently, his heart aching for her. "I will, Grandma. I promise." With that, he kissed her forehead and stood up, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. As he left the hospital, the cold air hit him like a slap, and the city seemed darker than usual. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the pavement as Nicholas made his way back to the orphanage. That night, he barely slept. His mind was too full of questions, memories, and the overwhelming burden of his grandmother's words. He kept replaying their conversation, wondering what else she might have kept from him, wondering if there was more to the story than even she knew. And then there was Roberta. What did she really know about his father? Could she be the key to unlocking the truth? The next morning, Nicholas decided to meet with Roberta again. He had to know more. He sent her a message, asking if they could talk, and within an hour, she had responded, suggesting they meet at a small cafe near the bar where he performed. Nicholas agreed, though his nerves were already buzzing with anticipation. When he arrived at the cafe, Roberta was already there, seated at a table by the window. She looked different today, more relaxed, but still guarded. Her eyes brightened when she saw Nicholas, and she waved him over. "Thank you for meeting me," Nicholas said as he sat down, his heart racing. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Andra. I talked to my grandmother, and she confirmed that my father was a musician, but she didn't tell me everything. I need to know more." Roberta nodded, her expression softening. "I understand, and I'll tell you everything I know, but I need you to be prepared. The truth might not be what you're expecting." Nicholas swallowed hard, bracing himself. "I'm ready." Roberta sighed, taking a sip of her coffee before she began. Andra was complicated. He was one of the most talented musicians I had ever met. His voice was incredible, and he had this passion for music that drew people to him. But he had his demons, just like your grandmother said. He struggled with addiction, and it tore him apart. We were in love, but he couldn't stay in one place for long. He would disappear for weeks, sometimes months, and I never knew where he went or when he'd come back. Nicholas listened intently, his chest tight with anxiety. This version of his father sounded both familiar and foreign, like the man Eleanor had described, but with more depth and complexity. "One day," Roberta continued, her voice tinged with sadness, "he told me he had a son. He didn't say much, just that he had a son from a previous relationship, and that he loved him more than anything. But he felt like he wasn't good enough to be in his life. He didn't think he could be the father you needed. That's when he started pulling away, and eventually, he just disappeared. Nicholas's heart ached as Roberta spoke. He had always wondered why his father had left, and now he had the answer. It wasn't because Andrew didn't care. It was because he thought he wasn't good enough. The thought filled Nicholas with a deep sadness, knowing that his father had struggled with the same feelings of inadequacy that had haunted Nicholas for years. "Do you know what happened to him?" Nicholas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Roberta shook her head slowly. "I wish I did. After he left, I tried to find him, just like your grandmother did. But it was like he vanished into thin air. No one knew where he went. I'm sorry, Nicholas. I don't have the answers you're looking for." Nicholas felt a sinking feeling in his chest. He had hoped that Roberta would be able to tell him what had happened to his father, but it seemed like the mystery would remain unsolved. Still, there was some comfort in knowing that Andrew had loved him, even if he hadn't been able to stay. "I just wish." Nicholas's voice trailed off as he struggled to find the words. "I just wish I could have known him." Roberta reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "I know, and I wish I could bring him back for you, but you still have a chance to honor him, to carry on his legacy through your music. That's something he would have been proud of." Nicholas nodded, his eyes filling with tears. He had spent so long wondering if he was enough, if his father had abandoned him because he wasn't worthy of love. But now, he understood that it had never been about him. It had been about Andrew's own demons. And while that knowledge didn't erase the pain, it gave him a sense of closure he hadn't expected. As they sat in silence, the weight of the truth settling between them, Nicholas realized that his journey wasn't over. There was still so much he didn't know, and so much he had yet to do. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way forward. Transcript of YouTube video, Part 4. Nicholas Johnson's journey into his past reveals more than he ever expected. His grandmother's secret, kept for years out of love and protection, opens the door to a father he never knew, a man named Andrew, a musician who struggled with his own demons. As Nicholas meets with Roberta once again, he uncovers the painful truth of why his father left and the love that remained, even from a distance. This chapter in Nicholas's life brings a sense of closure, but also the realization that the journey to find peace is far from over. The journey to redemption. The days that followed Nicholas's meeting with Roberta were some of the most emotionally turbulent of his life. He felt like he was walking through a fog, his thoughts heavy with the weight of everything he had learned. The truth about his father was like a double-edged sword. It gave him answers, but it also left him with a gaping wound. Andrew had loved him, but love hadn't been enough to keep him. Now Nicholas had to grapple with the fact that his father's absence had shaped his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. As much as he wanted to focus on his music and the opportunity that Roberta had presented through Dream Sounds Records, his mind kept circling back to the same question. Was he enough? Was he enough to make it on his own without the shadow of his father's failures haunting him? Would he be strong enough to help his grandmother when she needed him most, even with all the uncertainty in his life? And what kind of future could he build for himself when so much of his past had been hidden? On a chilly Thursday afternoon, after a long day of school, Nicholas found himself wandering through the city streets, lost in thought. His feet carried him without direction, his mind preoccupied with memories of Eleanor and Roberta's revelations. He hadn't yet signed the contract with Dream Sounds Records. Part of him wanted to jump at the chance. It could be his only shot at making enough money to pay for Eleanor's surgery and take control of his life. But another part of him hesitated, unsure if he was ready for the pressure that would come with it. As he passed by a park, the wind whipping through the trees, he noticed a group of young boys playing soccer on a worn field. Their laughter and shouts echoed in the cold air. a sharp contrast to the quiet that had enveloped him lately. He watched them for a moment, a pang of nostalgia hitting him. He remembered playing soccer with the neighborhood kids when he was younger, back when life felt simpler, before Eleanor's illness, and before the weight of his father's absence settled on his shoulders. Nicholas continued walking, eventually finding himself standing in front of the orphanage. He hadn't planned to come back so soon, but something had drawn him here. Maybe it was the familiarity, the sense of belonging to this place, however bittersweet it was. As much as he hated being away from Eleanor, the orphanage had become a second home, a place where he had found fleeting moments of comfort. As he entered the building, Miss Beatrice, the kind-hearted cook who had always looked out for him, spotted him and waved him over. Her face, worn with years of care and kindness, softened as she approached him. "Nicholas, my dear," she said warmly, wiping her hands on her apron. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. What's going on?" Nicholas smiled faintly. "It's been a lot lately. I found out some things about my father, things I never knew. And now, I don't know how to feel about it." Miss Beatrice led him to a small table in the kitchen and sat him down. She poured him a cup of tea, the steam rising between them like a quiet invitation to share what was on his mind. "Sometimes the truth can be heavier than we expect," she said gently. "But it's always better to know, even if it hurts. What did you learn?" Nicholas hesitated for a moment before telling her everything. About Andra, about Roberta, and about the struggles his father had faced. He spoke slowly, trying to make sense of it all as he spoke, and Miss Beatrice listened quietly, nodding occasionally but letting him take his time. When he finished, she sighed softly and reached across the table to take his hand. "Your father's story is a sad one, Nicholas, but it doesn't define you. You are not your father's mistakes. You've carried yourself with so much strength and grace, even in the hardest of times. I've watched you grow into a fine young man, and no matter what, you've got the heart and the courage to make your own path." Her words settled over him like a warm blanket, offering a comfort he hadn't known he needed. "But what if I make the same mistakes he did?" Nicholas asked, his voice laced with doubt. "What if I'm not strong enough to handle everything?" Miss Beatrice smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "We all fear repeating the mistakes of those who came before us. But you're already stronger than you know. You've faced challenges that most people twice your age haven't had to face. And you've kept going. That's what matters." Nicholas looked down at his cup of tea, the warmth radiating through his fingers. Miss Beatrice's words gave him a sense of hope, a small spark of belief in himself that he had been struggling to hold on to. But there was still a question lingering in his mind, one that he couldn't ignore. "What should I do about the contract?" Nicholas asked quietly. "I have the chance to sign with Dream Sounds Records. It could help me make enough money to pay for Eleanor's surgery, but I don't know if I'm ready." Miss Beatrice leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Nicholas. If this opportunity feels right in your heart, then you should take it. But if you're hesitating because you're not sure it's the right path for you, then it's okay to wait. You don't have to rush into anything. Trust yourself." Nicholas nodded, feeling the weight of her advice sink in. She was right. This decision wasn't just about money or success. It was about whether or not he believed in himself enough to take this next step. He needed to be sure that if he signed the contract, it was because he wanted to, not because he felt like he had to. As the evening wore on, Nicholas left the orphanage and walked toward the bar where he had been performing. Tonight would be different. He wasn't just singing for money anymore. He was singing for himself, for the love of music that had always been his refuge. When he arrived, Jack Rivera greeted him with his usual gruff kindness. "You ready for tonight, kid?" Jack asked, handing Nicholas a glass of water. "Word's spreading about you. People are starting to show up just to hear you sing." Nicholas smiled, feeling a bit of pride swell in his chest. "Yeah, I'm ready." He stepped onto the stage, the familiar buzz of nerves settling in his stomach. But tonight, those nerves felt different. Instead of being weighed down by uncertainty, they were fueled by a sense of purpose. This was his moment, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was in control of his future. As he began to sing, the room fell silent. His voice, rich with emotion, filled the air, carrying with it the story of his journey. His love for Eleanor, the pain of losing his father, and the hope that had kept him going through it all. Each note was a testament to his resilience, a reminder that no matter what, he had the strength to move forward. And as the final note hung in the air, the applause that followed was louder than ever before. But Nicholas wasn't focused on the applause. His mind was clear, his heart steady. He knew what he had to do. After the performance, Roberta approached him with a smile. "You were incredible tonight, Nicholas. Dream Sounds is still interested in offering you the contract. Are you ready to talk about it?" Nicholas looked at her, his mind made up. "I've thought about it a lot," he said, his voice calm. "And I'm ready. But I want to do it on my terms. I want to make sure that this journey is about my music and my story, not just about chasing success." Roberta's smile widened, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you. Let's make it happen." That night, Nicholas signed the contract with Dream Sounds Records, but this time, it wasn't about saving Eleanor or proving his worth. It was about honoring his own path, about forging a future that was his to shape. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that he was ready for it. And no matter what, he would carry the lessons of his past with him, using them to guide him as he built the life he had always dreamed of. Transcript of YouTube video, Part 5. In this chapter of Nicholas Johnson's journey, he faces a life-altering decision, whether to sign a record deal that could change everything. As he grapples with the truth about his father, Andrew, and the weight of his grandmother's illness, Nicholas turns to the people who have supported him along the way. With wisdom from Miss Beatrice and the strength he finds within himself, Nicholas realizes that his path is his own to forge. As he takes the next step in his career, he does so with purpose, courage, and a renewed sense of hope. A new beginning and the power of legacy. With his signature on the contract, Nicholas's world transformed overnight. He had officially become part of Dream Sounds Records, and the excitement was electric, yet daunting. The reality of his choice settled in quickly as his days filled with meetings, voice coaching sessions, and introductions to the industry's complex inner workings. Nicholas felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed, aware that this opportunity came with great responsibility. He knew he was walking a path that his father had dreamed of but never fully reached. As much as he was excited about the new life before him, Nicholas never lost sight of his original purpose: saving Eleanor. The contract with Dream Sounds included an advance payment, more money than he had ever held in his hands, and it was enough to schedule Eleanor's surgery. After months of worry and sleepless nights, he finally felt a glimmer of hope for her recovery. The day of Eleanor's surgery came quickly, and Nicholas spent every second at her side, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement. He told her about his plans, about how he had decided to follow his heart, and about how everything he was doing was for her. Eleanor, though frail, listened intently, her eyes bright with pride and love. "You've become more than I ever could have dreamed, Nicholas," she whispered as they waited for the doctors to take her in. "Your father would be so proud of you. You've found a strength in yourself that few people ever do." Nicholas's heart ached with gratitude. "Thank you, Grandma. None of this would have been possible without you." As she was wheeled into the operating room, Nicholas sat in the waiting room, his hands trembling, his mind racing with memories of their time together. He thought of all the sacrifices Eleanor had made for him, all the times she had shielded him from the harshness of life, and all the love she had poured into raising him alone. The hours passed slowly, each second feeling like an eternity, but Nicholas kept faith, praying that Eleanor would come out of the surgery safe and healthy. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the doctor emerged from the operating room. Nicholas's heart pounded as he stood up, his eyes searching the doctor's face for any sign of hope. "She made it through the surgery," the doctor said with a reassuring smile. "She'll need time to recover, but she's strong. She'll pull through." Relief flooded through Nicholas, and he felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. He thanked the doctor profusely, his heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. Eleanor was safe, and he had kept his promise to her. Over the next few weeks, Nicholas's life became a whirlwind of changes. He spent his days visiting Eleanor at the hospital, watching over her as she slowly regained her strength. At the same time, he threw himself into his work with Dream Sounds, recording songs that told his story. The story of a boy who had been through more than most, but had found hope and purpose in the face of adversity. His voice, raw and filled with emotion, resonated with audiences, and soon his first single was ready for release. The song, titled Echoes of Love, was a tribute to Eleanor, a heartfelt melody that captured the essence of their journey together. It was a song about love, resilience, and the power of family. And as it hit the airwaves, it quickly became a sensation. People connected with the story behind the music, drawn to the honesty and vulnerability in Nicholas's voice. For him, the song was more than just a career milestone. It was a testament to his journey and a promise to carry forward the legacy of love that Eleanor had given him. One crisp autumn evening, as Nicholas sat by Eleanor's hospital bed, his phone buzzed with notifications. His song had gone viral. Messages poured in from strangers who had heard echoes of love and were moved by its message. People shared stories of their own struggles, of the loved ones they had fought to protect, and of the resilience that had kept them going through their darkest days. Eleanor watched him with a gentle smile, her hand resting over his. "You've touched so many lives, Nicholas," she said softly. "This is what your father always dreamed of doing. He may not have been able to stay, but he left a piece of himself in you, a gift that you've turned into something beautiful." Nicholas felt a swell of emotion as he looked at her, the woman who had given everything for him. "I wouldn't be here without you, Grandma. I owe it all to you." But Eleanor shook her head, her eyes filled with warmth. "No, my boy. You did this. You found your voice, your strength. You made this journey your own." The following week, Eleanor was finally discharged from the hospital, and Nicholas took her home. They spent their days together in the cozy apartment that had been his sanctuary for so long, filling it with music and laughter as they celebrated Eleanor's recovery and Nicholas's success. Life was far from perfect, but for the first time, Nicholas felt at peace. With the release of Echoes of Love, Dream Sounds Records arranged for a small concert to celebrate Nicholas's debut. The venue, though modest, was packed with people who had been touched by his story. As he stood backstage, preparing to perform in front of a live audience for the first time, Nicholas felt a surge of nerves mixed with excitement. He had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, the reality felt overwhelming. Roberta, who had been by his side every step of the way, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This is your moment, Nicholas. Go out there and show them who you are." He nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping onto the stage. The spotlight was blinding, but as he looked out into the crowd, he spotted Eleanor sitting in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. She had insisted on coming, and though Nicholas had worried about her health, he knew that this moment wouldn't be complete without her. As the music began, Nicholas closed his eyes and let the song carry him. Each note was a piece of his story, a reflection of the love, loss, and resilience that had brought him to this moment. He poured his heart into the performance, his voice filled with the passion and purpose that he had discovered along the way. And as he sang, he felt a presence beside him, a whisper of his father's spirit, a sense that Anders' legacy lived on through his music. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. The audience rose to their feet, their cheers echoing through the venue, and Nicholas felt a surge of emotion as he looked out over the crowd. He had finally found his place, his purpose, and he knew that he was no longer defined by his father's absence. He had created a legacy of his own, one built on love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond he shared with Eleanor. After the concert, as the crowd began to disperse, Nicholas spotted Eleanor waiting for him backstage. She hugged him tightly, her voice choked with emotion. "You were magnificent, Nicholas. Your father would be so proud of you." Nicholas hugged her back, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything. I couldn't have done it without you." They stood together in silence for a moment, both of them overwhelmed by the journey they had shared. And as they left the venue, hand in hand, Nicholas knew that this was only the beginning. There were still challenges ahead, still battles to face, but he was ready. He had found his voice, his purpose, and he knew that no matter what happened, he would always carry the legacy of love that Eleanor and Andrew had left him. For Nicholas, the journey had been long and filled with hardship, but it had also been a journey of self-discovery, a path that had led him to a place of peace and acceptance. He had learned that his father's mistakes did not define him, that his past did not have to dictate his future. And as he looked toward the horizon, he felt a deep sense of hope, a belief that, no matter what came next, he would face it with the strength and courage that had brought him this far. Transcript of YouTube video, Part 6. In the final chapter of Nicholas Johnson's journey, he discovers the power of love, resilience, and legacy. With his grandmother Eleanor by his side, Nicholas faces the world with newfound confidence, sharing his story through music that touches the hearts of many. Through his struggles and triumphs, he learns that he is not defined by the past, but by the love and strength he has found within himself. This is a story of redemption, of honoring the legacy of those who came before us, and of embracing the future with courage and hope.